guys, so welcome to Lunchtime Lessons today. So we're doing another session on making comparisons, yeah? So we did a while back, we did a video about linkers we can use for comparing and contrasting. And today we're not going to focus on linkers, we're going to focus on a super easy way to really quickly boost your vocabulary. And this will, of course, make your language much more interesting. But if you're somebody who's planning to take any exams in the future, this is such a great way to really, really quickly raise your vocabulary mark. Okay, so yeah, for both your writing and your speaking in English. So it's a useful lesson if you are planning to take any exams, and also if you just want to make your English a little bit more interesting. So I'm not going to focus on forming comparatives today, yeah, but just very quickly to do some revision in case anyone doesn't really remember. When we're using comparatives, it's to talk about differences and similarities, right? So comparative always has to have two things because you are comparing, so you always need to have something to compare to, and we can use them to talk about differences. When we talk about a difference, that's when we use than, okay, not that. Watch out for that, it's a really common mistake. And when something is equal, we use that as and as structure. Okay, also watch out, another common mistake I hear with comparatives is it's the same than instead of it's the same as. Yeah. And just if we can also use pronouns after that, like Simon is taller than Louise, Simon is taller than her, etc. Okay, so this is just very quick revision of the structure, right? All of these notes will be available afterwards in classrooms too. Now, if we're talking about superlatives, remember that we use a superlative to talk about a maximum. And because we're talking about a maxim, like the ultimate thing, we only talk about one thing, not two, like with a comparative. And also, because we're talking about something specific, we always use the word the with a superlative as well, okay? Sometimes that will be substituted with a possessive adjective like my, right? And you'll see the most and the least used with a superlative, when with a comparative we'll use more or less, okay? So you probably know the rules for forming comparatives, okay? But let's just very quickly do some word formation and see if you can remember how we create a comparative and a superlative adjective when it's one syllable, when it's two syllables that end in Y, two syllables or more with more or less, or irregular ones. So what I mean by that, for example, if I have a one syllable adjective, I add ER. And if I have a one syllable superlative, I add EST, okay? So just quickly think about whether you know the answer for the others. I know this might seem basic. I'll talk more about that in a second. But if you're, again, doing any exams, these are really commonly tested word formation questions. And they're very common errors that sorry, my brain just froze there. These are common errors that will come up repeatedly in speaking and in written English as well. Okay, so just have a little think, yeah? So when we're ending in Y, remember that we need to add IER. This is one of the areas I most commonly see mistakes. I hear more easy, for example, instead of easier. And IEST for the superlative. When you've got two syllables, we use more or less for the comparatives, and we use the most or the least for the superlatives. And remember, those are regulars, guys, okay? Better, worse, or farther or further. Best, worst, farthest, furthest. farther and further, farthest, furthest. These are both options, but it's much more common to use the you, further and furthest. Okay. So I know this seems easy grammar, but it's an area, like I said, where a lot of students make repeated errors. And just to highlight, please remember that when you learn something in English doesn't mean that it's an easy or a difficult thing. So very often when we learn something early in English, like in a beginner class, we think that means it's easy grammar, okay? That doesn't mean it's easy grammar. Language takes time to assimilate, and some things that can have quite simple rules to construct, like the comparatives, are something that actually take a long time for people to process, okay? So please be aware of that. Don't think like you're making basic mistakes because it's just something that's difficult. Having said that, if you're taking an exam, unfortunately, examiners don't see it that way. So you need to watch out for those kind of mistakes. Okay, so make sure that you double check your writing and you watch your speaking when you're talking, just to avoid those kind of repeated errors. All right. Okay. So that's the basics with our comparative structures. So what we're going to think about today is how we can make your language even better super quickly. Okay. And it's going to involve modifiers, right? Now, modifiers sound like a scary word. It's really not. All we do with a modifier for a comparative and a superlative is we stick it at the beginning of it, okay? So you're just like sticking something in front of your comparative and it's going to look so much better. And what it does is that you're able to better express yourself in English. You can give more information about how you feel about something, and your language is just going to look significantly more impressive. Yeah. These are examples of people talking about film adaptations of books that they've read and their opinion about it. Okay. And you'll notice that we've got quite a number of these modifiers, these things which are changing the adjectives or the adverbs. Yeah. And we're working with comparative and superlative adjectives and adverbs here. So what I would like you to do, guys, is have a look at the examples, okay? Read through these examples, and then you're going to organize them into the correct box here. Which of these modifiers are we using with an as structure? For example, this first one, not nearly as good as. Which ones are we using with comparative adjectives or adverbs? Okay, so for example, much better. Which ones are we using with superlatives? For example, by far the best. And which ones are we using with a repeated comparative structure? So what do I mean by that? I mean, like this example, the more I watch the Outlander series, the more I prefer it to the books. Okay, all right. So have a look through those. You're going to put them into this box. Okay, let's have a look together at the answers. Don't worry if you haven't done all of them. But we'll have a look together, and then I'm going to show you a few more examples, and then we're going to think about the sort of intensity of these, what these mean too. So the structures that we had, which we're using this as, okay, were not nearly as good as, and just as lovable as. Over here, we had all of these nice modifiers that we were using with the comparative adjectives. A lot more, a great deal, much better, a bit more historical. With our superlatives, we had by far the best and easily the best. And then finally, the repeated comparative structures, we had this: the sooner you read the books, the better, more and more popular, or bigger and bigger, and the more I do something, the more I da-da-da, okay? So just to talk about these repeated comparative structures, okay? The sooner you read the books, the better This just depends on which comparative adjective you're using. So, for example, if it was a word like difficult, I would say the more difficult the test, the more interesting the course, for example. Okay, and the same here. If I have a longer word like popular with more and more popular, but if it's just a one syllable word, bigger and bigger. I don't use more in this one here. I repeat the adjective here, but I just repeat the more here. Okay. Was this new vocabulary, guys? Had you seen it before? Yeah. So we've probably seen it before, but the problem is that we're not using it when we're speaking and we're not using it when we're writing. Yeah. And it's a really lost opportunity because it's not complicated. Yeah. It's just learning vocabulary to put together with some other vocabulary. Let me give you some more examples. We're going to think about which the structures are in these examples and where we would put them in our list. So just about, okay, just about, you'll see we're using that with a superlative. Very often that structure is used with I have ever. Okay, you'll see a lot with that structure. The driver started going faster and faster. Okay, so that's another one of these repeated comparative structures. The film is nowhere near, and you'll see that we're using it with an as. It's getting more and more complicated. Okay, so that's another example of the repeated comparative structure we saw before. Bus is slightly cheaper, using that with a comparative. Our new car is twice as big as, so with the as structure. And you'll see this as well with twice, but then it would be 3 times as big as, 4 times as big as. We have another comparative here. We're using a little. Almost is being used with an as structure. And the new book here, we've got another as structure, isn't half as good as. And finally, she is one of the most successful artists around. So we're using that with a superlative. Yeah. So if we go back to the structures that we had before, guys. Sorry. There we go. If I put these into my box like we had there, we've got a few more now with as. Lots of extra ones here. Nowhere near as, twice as big as, almost as rich as, isn't half as good as. A couple more that we can use with our comparative adjectives or adverbs, and a couple more we can use with our superlatives as well. So a really nice big selection of language. There might be some new vocabulary there. There might be some that you've not seen before. There might be some that you're using, but you probably aren't using it nearly enough. Right? And that's what I really want us to think about the way that you can very, very quickly improve your language. If I put this in order of intensity, okay, it would look like this. So if I say something is nowhere near as good as, I'm talking about a really huge difference. Okay. And if I say someone is almost as rich as you, we're saying that there's a very small difference because it's a much closer similarity. Yeah. Just a couple of notes there, guys. This one here, we usually use to talk about the quality of something. So it isn't half as good as, it isn't half as interesting as. And this one here with twice as or 3 times as is usually to talk about size or cost. Over here, guys, it's important as well to think of the register as well as the intensity. So a great deal better is sort of a neutral to formal one, which would look so fantastic in something like a report or an essay. And a bit more here is a much more neutral to informal one. And here you have 2 options, right? Slightly has a more formal tone and register, whereas a little is a bit more neutral. Okay. Our modifiers would be like this in order of intensity. And these ones here, not really a difference with the repeated comparative structures. Okay. They're more or less the same, right? So like I said before, comparatives, the theory isn't complicated. The application quite often takes us a while to assimilate, and we can make some mistakes when we're speaking. But if you want to add on the modifiers, it's just like a very easy jigsaw puzzle, okay? Putting two pieces together directly, yeah? So I've got a task for you to try, guys, okay? Here's a great way that you can begin to incorporate this language into your speaking. And of course, you can also do it into your writing as well. This is a first certificate speaking task, which I've taken. You can find one if you're doing a different exam, look for a different comparative speaking question, okay? And I'd like you to try recording yourself answering the task, right? So why are the people enjoying these experiences? Yeah. So when you're doing these kind of tasks, please remember ABC, right? Always be comparing, okay? You want to be constantly comparing the two together. And that's where that extra language that we've looked at today is going to really boost your mark and impress the examiner so much, right? If you're able to add in these extras, okay? I gave you a lot of language there. You don't need to use all of that language. Just try and include a selection, right? And I recommend choosing ones that you know that you'll remember and that you feel are easy to apply. So if you are never going to remember nowhere near as, forget that, right? Let's look at one which is going to be easier for you to process and assimilate, okay? And yeah, try and use a variety of maybe like 3 comparative ones and 2 of the more superlative structures. Mix it up there. And the first time you do it, it'll probably be really bad. That's absolutely fine. So repeat it and keep repeating it and keep repeating it. And that's just a great way that you're going to assimilate the new language and you're going to learn it too. Task repetition is such a fantastic thing to do to help learn language and also improve your skills. Okay?